Arrogant CEO refuses to pay waitress, the owner's response leaves him speechless. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the windows of the Sterling Rose, one of Chicago's most prestigious restaurants. It was a place where crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on marble floors, where every plate was a masterpiece of culinary art, and where the wealthy came to see and be seen. But on this particular Thursday evening, something would happen that would shake the very foundations of this temple of fine dining. The story that unfolded would become legendary, not because of the food or the ambience, but because of a single moment when power met principle, when arrogance collided with authenticity, and when a waitress named Elena Martinez spoke words that would echo through the halls of privilege forever. Elena had been working at the Sterling Rose for only 3 months, but those 3 months felt like 3 years. Every morning, she woke up at 5:30 to get her twin boys ready for school. Miguel and Carlos were 8 years old, full of energy and dreams that Elena was determined to nurture despite their modest circumstances. After dropping them off at school, she would rush to her day job at a local bakery, kneading dough and decorating cakes until 3 in the afternoon. Then came the quick change into her pristine black and white uniform for her evening shift at the Sterling Rose. The restaurant job paid better than anything else she could find, and the tips from wealthy patrons could mean the difference between paying rent on time or facing another late notice. Elena had learned to perfect her smile, to memorize every detail of the extensive wine list, and to glide between tables with the grace of a dancer. She spoke softly, moved efficiently, and never complained, even when her feet screamed in pain after 12-hour days. The owner of the Sterling Rose was a woman named Margaret Chen, though everyone called her Ms. Chen out of respect. She was 62 years old, with silver hair always pulled back in an elegant bun and eyes that missed nothing. Ms. Chen had built the Sterling Rose from nothing, starting with a small cafe 30 years ago and growing it into one of the most sought-after reservations in Chicago. She knew every employee by name, from the head chef to the newest busboy. She believed in excellence, but she also believed in treating her staff with dignity. That Thursday started like any other day, with Elena setting tables with military precision, ensuring every fork was aligned, every glass spotless. The lunch crowd had been particularly demanding, but she handled each request with patience and professionalism. As evening approached, the restaurant began to fill with its usual clientele of business executives, celebrities, and social elite. Elena was assigned to Section 3, which included the private booth that was typically reserved for the most important guests. At 7:30 sharp, Marcus Stone walked through the doors of the Sterling Rose. He was the CEO of Stone Technologies, a company that had revolutionized data encryption and made him a billionaire before his 40th birthday. Marcus was now 45, with perfectly styled black hair showing distinguished touches of gray at the temples. His suit was custom-made Italian, his watch was a limited edition piece worth more than most people's houses, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never been told no, who believed that money could solve any problem and open any door. Following behind him were 2 business associates from Japan, potential investors he was courting for his latest venture. Marcus had chosen the Sterling Rose specifically to impress them, to show them that he moved in circles of power and prestige. He barely acknowledged the hostess who greeted him, simply stating his name and expecting immediate recognition and service. Elena approached their table with her usual professional demeanor, carrying water glasses on a silver tray. She set them down carefully, maintaining perfect posture despite the exhaustion pulling at her shoulders. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said warmly. "Welcome to the Sterling Rose. My name is Elena, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. May I start you with our wine selection or would you prefer cocktails?" Marcus didn't even look at her, his attention focused on his phone screen. "Just bring us your most expensive bottle of red," he said dismissively, waving his hand as if shooing away a fly. "And make sure it's actually good. I don't want any of that overpriced garbage you probably serve to tourists." Elena maintained her composure, though the dismissive tone stung. She retrieved the wine list and recommended an exceptional Bordeaux that the sommelier had specifically selected for its quality. Marcus glanced at the price, seemed satisfied that it was expensive enough to impress his guests, and nodded curtly. As Elena poured the wine with practiced precision, Marcus was explaining to his guests about his company's latest achievement, speaking loudly enough that neighboring tables could hear. He boasted about firing an entire department that hadn't met his expectations, laughing as he described how they had begged for second chances. His associates seemed uncomfortable, exchanging glances, but Marcus was too absorbed in his own narrative to notice. When Elena returned to take their food orders, Marcus interrupted her explanation of the specials 3 times to take phone calls, each time speaking louder than necessary about deals worth millions. When she finally managed to complete their order, he added multiple modifications to each dish, demanding changes that the kitchen would struggle to accommodate. Through it all, Elena remained patient and professional, writing down every detail, confirming each special request. The trouble really began when the appetizers arrived. Marcus had ordered the lobster bisque, but when Elena set it before him, he immediately pushed it away. "This is cold," he declared, though steam was visibly rising from the bowl. Elena knew it wasn't cold, she had felt the heat through the bowl when she carried it, but she apologized and offered to bring him a fresh serving. He rolled his eyes dramatically, making comments to his guests about the incompetence of American service workers. The Japanese businessmen looked increasingly uncomfortable, but Marcus seemed to feed off the power he wielded over the waitress. When the main courses arrived, cooked exactly to his specifications, Marcus found fault with everything. The steak was too rare, then after it was recooked, too done. The vegetables were too soft, the sauce too rich. Each complaint was delivered with increasing volume and decreasing civility. Elena's hands began to tremble slightly as she cleared the plates, trying to salvage what was becoming a disaster of a service. Other diners were beginning to notice the commotion, their conversations trailing off as they watched the scene unfold. One elderly couple at a nearby table gave Elena sympathetic looks, while a young woman recorded the interaction on her phone, sensing something significant was happening. Ms. Chen, who had been in her office reviewing invoices, heard the disturbance through her security monitors. She stood up, smoothing her dress, and began walking toward the dining room. She had seen difficult customers before, but something about this situation made her particularly attentive. She positioned herself where she could observe without immediately intervening, wanting to see how Elena would handle the situation. When it came time for dessert, Marcus waved Elena away before she could even offer the menu. "Just bring the check," he said coldly. "This has been the worst dining experience I've ever had. Your service is pathetic, your food is mediocre, and I don't understand how this place stays in business." Elena's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she maintained her professional demeanor. She processed the check, which came to over $800 with the wine, and presented it in a leather folder. Marcus glanced at it, then looked up at Elena with a cruel smile. "You know what?" he said, his voice carrying across the now silent dining room. "I'm not paying for this disaster. You've ruined my important business dinner with your incompetence. In fact, you should be paying me for having to endure this terrible service." The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in the restaurant had stopped eating, stopped talking, stopped breathing it seemed. Elena stood frozen, the leather folder still in her hand, trying to process what had just happened. She had dealt with difficult customers before, but never someone who simply refused to pay. Her mind raced with the implications. Would this come out of her paycheck? She couldn't afford to lose $800. That was more than a week's wages. Her boys needed new school shoes, the electric bill was overdue, and the refrigerator had been making strange noises that suggested expensive repairs were coming. Tears began to well in her eyes, but she forced them back, refusing to give this man the satisfaction of seeing her break. It was at this moment that Ms. Chen stepped forward from the shadows. Her presence immediately commanded attention, and even Marcus seemed to sense a shift in the atmosphere. "Elena, dear," Ms. Chen said gently, placing a hand on the waitress's shoulder. "Why don't you take a moment? I'll handle this." But Elena, surprising everyone including herself, shook her head. "No, Ms. Chen," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I need to say something." She turned to Marcus, who was looking at her with amused disdain, clearly expecting her to beg or plead. "Mr. Stone," Elena began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You may have all the money in the world, but you have no class, no manners, and no basic human decency. I have served you with nothing but respect and professionalism despite your rudeness, your impossible demands, and your deliberate attempts to humiliate me. You think your wealth makes you superior, but all it's done is reveal how empty you are inside." Marcus's face went from amused to shocked to furious in the span of seconds. "How dare you speak to me like that?" he sputtered, starting to rise from his seat. "Do you know who I am? I could buy this entire restaurant and fire you in a heartbeat. I could destroy your career with one phone call. You're nothing but a waitress, a nobody who should be grateful to even serve someone like me." But Ms. Chen stepped forward, her voice cutting through his tirade like a knife through butter. "Mr. Stone," she said calmly, "I am Margaret Chen, the owner of this establishment. I've been watching your behavior all evening, and I must say, I'm appalled. You've insulted my staff, disrupted my restaurant, and now you're refusing to pay for services rendered." Elena's eyes widened in surprise. She had seen Ms. Chen around the restaurant but had never been formally introduced, assuming she was perhaps a manager or supervisor, not the actual owner. Ms. Chen continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had built an empire from nothing. "In my 30 years of running restaurants, I've served presidents, celebrities, and yes, even billionaires. But never have I witnessed such a disgraceful display of arrogance and cruelty. Elena has been nothing but professional, while you've acted like a spoiled child throwing a tantrum." Marcus tried to interrupt, but Ms. Chen raised her hand, silencing him. "As for your threat to buy my restaurant, Mr. Stone, the sterling rose is not for sale, not to you, not for any amount. And regarding your bill, you have two choices. You can pay it now, along with a 30% gratuity for the trauma you've inflicted on my employee, or I can call the police and have you arrested for theft of services. Additionally, I see that young woman over there has been recording this entire interaction. I imagine your investors might be very interested to see how you conduct yourself in public." The Japanese businessmen at Marcus's table were already gathering their things, clearly mortified by the situation. One of them approached Ms. Chen and Elena, bowing slightly. "We deeply apologize for our associate's behavior," he said in accented English. "This is not how business should be conducted. Please, allow us to cover the bill and an appropriate compensation for your troubles." He pulled out a credit card and handed it to Elena, then placed several $100 bills on the table as a tip. "We will not be continuing our business relationship with Mr. Stone." Marcus's face had gone from red to white as the reality of the situation hit him. His potential investors were walking away, his behavior had been recorded and would likely go viral, and he was being publicly humiliated in front of Chicago's social elite. He fumbled for his wallet, throwing cash on the table before storming out without another word, his exit followed by a spontaneous round of applause from the other diners. Elena stood in shock, still processing what had just happened. Ms. Chen turned to her with a warm smile. "Elena, my dear, you showed more grace and courage tonight than most people display in a lifetime. I want you to know that you have my full support, always. No employee of mine should ever have to endure such treatment. I think you should take the rest of the evening off, paid of course, and please, take tomorrow off as well. You've earned it." Tears finally spilled down Elena's cheeks, but now they were tears of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Ms. Chen. I don't know what to say. I thought I might lose my job for speaking up." Ms. Chen shook her head firmly. "On the contrary. You've reminded me why I started this restaurant in the first place. It was never about serving the wealthy, it was about creating something beautiful, a place where excellence and dignity go hand in hand. You exemplified both tonight." As Elena gathered her things to leave, other diners stopped her to offer words of support and encouragement. The elderly couple pressed $100 bill into her hand, insisting she take it. The young woman who had been recording showed her that the video already had thousands of views on social media, with comments pouring in supporting Elena and condemning Marcus Stone. By the time Elena got home that night, her phone was buzzing with messages from friends and family who had seen the video. The story of the waitress who stood up to the billionaire CEO was spreading like wildfire across the internet. News outlets were calling the Sterling Rose for statements, and Marcus Stone's company stock had already begun to drop in after-hours trading as the video went viral. The next morning, Elena woke to find several job offers in her email from restaurant owners who had seen the video and wanted to hire someone with her integrity and grace under pressure. But more importantly, Ms. Chen called personally to offer her a promotion to restaurant manager, with a substantial raise and benefits that would mean she could finally work just one job and spend more time with her boys. The video had been viewed over 10 million times, and Marcus Stone had been forced to issue a public apology, though most people saw it as a desperate attempt at damage control. His company lost 3 major contracts within a week, and 2 board members resigned in protest of his behavior. The Japanese investors he had been courting released a statement distancing themselves from him and praising the Sterling Rose for maintaining standards of dignity and respect. But the most remarkable outcome came 2 weeks later when Elena received a call from an unexpected source. It was Marcus Stone's ex-wife, Patricia, who had seen the video and reached out to thank Elena. "For years, I endured that kind of treatment," Patricia said, her voice emotional. "Watching you stand up to him gave me and many others the courage to speak out about our own experiences with powerful men who think money makes them untouchable. You didn't just stand up for yourself that night, Elena. You stood up for all of us who've been silenced by wealth and power." The conversation led to Patricia establishing a foundation for service workers' rights, with Elena as one of the founding board members. The foundation provided legal support for workers facing harassment and discrimination, and within its first year, it had helped hundreds of employees across the country. Ms. Chen's restaurant became more popular than ever, with reservations booked months in advance. But she made a point of keeping tables available for regular working families, refusing to let the Sterling Rose become an exclusive playground for the wealthy. She instituted a policy where any customer who mistreated staff would be immediately asked to leave, no matter who they were or how much they were spending. The sign she placed at the entrance became famous in its own right. "At the Sterling Rose, we serve excellence with dignity. Respect is not optional, it is required. Those who cannot treat our staff with courtesy are not welcome, regardless of their ability to pay." Elena's boys watched their mother transform from an exhausted waitress working 2 jobs to a confident restaurant manager who had become a symbol of standing up against workplace harassment. They learned that dignity was worth more than money, that courage could come from unexpected places, and that sometimes, one person standing up for what's right could inspire millions. Marcus Stone's fall from grace was swift and complete. Within 6 months, he had been removed as CEO of his own company, his reputation in tatters. The video of his behavior became a cautionary tale in business schools about the importance of emotional intelligence and treating all people with respect. He attempted several comeback attempts, but each time, the video would resurface, reminding everyone of who he really was behind the expensive suits and important titles. Some reported seeing him working as a consultant for small firms, a far cry from his previous position of power. The irony was not lost on anyone that he now had to serve others rather than being served. The Sterling Rose instituted an annual award in Elena's name, given to the service industry worker who best exemplified grace under pressure and standing up for dignity in the workplace. The award came with a substantial cash prize and scholarship opportunities, funded partly by Ms. Chen and partly by donations from grateful customers who had witnessed or heard about that fateful night. Elena herself went back to school, completing her business degree while managing the restaurant. She became a sought-after speaker at hospitality industry conferences, sharing her story and advocating for better treatment of service workers. Her boys grew up proud of their mother, understanding that true strength wasn't about having power over others, but about having the courage to speak truth to power. Years later, when asked about that night in an interview for a documentary about workplace dignity, Elena reflected on what had changed. I used to think that keeping quiet and accepting poor treatment was part of the job, she said. That night taught me that no paycheck is worth your dignity. When Ms. Chen stood up for me, when the other diners applauded, when millions of strangers online supported me, I realized that most people believe in basic decency. It's only a few who think their money makes them superior to others. And those few need to be reminded that in a truly civilized society, the measure of a person isn't their bank account, but how they treat those they perceive as beneath them. Ms. Chen, who had become something of a mother figure to Elena, added her own thoughts. That night reminded me why I love this business. It's not about the food, though we serve excellent food. It's not about the ambience, though we've created a beautiful space. It's about human connection, about creating moments where people can come together with dignity and mutual respect. When Marcus Stone tried to destroy that with his cruelty and arrogance, Elena and I together showed him that some things can't be bought. Respect, dignity, integrity, these are earned through actions, not purchased with wealth. The documentary, titled Arrogant CEO Refuses to Pay Waitress, the owner's response leaves him speechless, won several awards and was streamed millions of times. It became required viewing in many business schools and corporate training programs, a reminder that true leadership requires empathy and respect for all people, regardless of their position. The Sterling Rose became more than just a restaurant. It became a symbol of what was possible when people stood together against bullying and harassment. The reservation list included teachers, nurses, firefighters, and other everyday heroes who were often welcomed as warmly as any celebrity or CEO. Ms. Chen made sure that Elena's story was never forgotten, displaying a framed photo of that night in the restaurant's entrance, along with a plaque that read, "On this spot, dignity prevailed over dollars, courage conquered cruelty," and a waitress reminded the world that respect has no price tag. For Elena, life had changed dramatically. She still worked hard, still faced challenges, but now she did so with the knowledge that she had value beyond her job title, that her voice mattered, and that standing up for yourself could inspire others to do the same. The ripple effects of that one night continued for years. Other restaurants adopted similar policies protecting their staff. Several states passed legislation increasing penalties for harassment of service workers. And Marcus Stone became a cautionary tale, his name synonymous with the kind of arrogant entitlement that society was increasingly unwilling to tolerate. Some said he had learned his lesson, others doubted he was capable of real change. But what mattered was that his behavior was no longer acceptable, no longer something that workers had to endure in silence. Elena often thought about that moment when she decided to speak up, when she chose her dignity over her fear. It hadn't been easy, and in that instant, she couldn't have known how it would end. But she had learned that sometimes, the biggest risk was not taking a risk at all, that staying silent in the face of injustice was its own form of defeat. The story of that night at the Sterling Rose became legend in the hospitality industry, told and retold to new employees as a reminder that they deserved respect, that they had allies, and that sometimes, standing up to power could change everything. It proved that money might buy many things, but it couldn't buy class, couldn't buy respect, and certainly couldn't silence the truth when spoken with courage. And so the title of this story remains as true today as it was that night. Arrogant CEO refuses to pay waitress, the owner's response leaves him speechless. It serves as a reminder that in the end, true power doesn't come from wealth or position, but from the courage to stand up for what's right, the integrity to treat all people with dignity, and the wisdom to know that every human being, regardless of their job or status, deserves basic respect and decency.